Well, let's pick up where we left off last time. What I want to talk about today is the preconditions for Unsafe acts. Last time we talked briefly about Jim Reason's Swiss cheese model of human error, and then we kind of went through the unsafe acts of operations, those errors and violations. And what we're going to do today is continue our discussion by looking at the preconditions for those unsafe acts. In other words, what was it about the individual that day that was different than any other day? And the way we're going to do that is we're going to look at we're going to start first by looking at what I'll call the condition of the operator. In other words, the condition of the person at the pointing of the spear, the person that's actually doing the work. So let's take a look at three things. We look at adverse mental states, adverse physiological states, and physical mental limitations. And let's take a peek at each of those for a second. When I talk about adverse mental states, I'm not talking about whether or not the person was crazy or not. That may or may not be an issue. What I'm really interested in are really two issues. The attitude, the mental well-being, the mental framework of the individual, and then their cognitive state. And I know that's kind of, basically I'm trying to get an understanding of what they're thinking and how they're thinking. So when we look at attitudes, we look at things like anger, happiness, a variety of frustration. Those sorts of things all impact performance. I mean, after all, if I'm angry, if you remember my story from the Unsafe Acts, when I was angry that I had to take my daughter to her choir recital, it affected the way I was thinking. So, and it also led to the skill-based error, because no longer was I paying attention. Because when I'm angry, it's hard to, really focus on what you're doing. Or if you're frustrated, we've all been frustrated in a task. Or if I really want to get you, if I want to fail somebody on an exam, I can fail anybody on an exam. It's very simple. And I don't have to write tricky questions or anything. Basically, here's what I can do to really ruin your day. Basically, what I could do is set up the exam so the hardest questions are first and the easier ones are towards the end. Because if I can get you stressed out, if I can get you frustrated, if I can get you to a point where you're almost like, I've spent all this time and, I can't believe it. I can't answer the first 5 questions. It doesn't matter how easy the last ones are, you'll never get them. That's why a lot of test takers will tell you what you need to do is you go through the exam quickly first, just look at it, and start answering all the ones you can answer real easily. Now, hopefully there's more than 1 or 2, but the truth is that when you look at it that way, what happens is when you get stressed out, you start forgetting things. You start making mistakes. One of the classics is when I went through flight training in the Navy, I wanted to be a pilot my whole life. You have to understand, this was my biggest thing. And I went through ground school where you learn all about the plane and the engine and all that. And I aced everything. I knew it all. And I worked really, really hard to understand and know everything. And one of the first things they do when your instructor takes you out to the aircraft in the Navy is they open up the cowling of the engine cowling, and they start pointing at parts of the engine. Now, I've looked at this countless times. I mean, they'll show you things that are just, some of which are obvious, but then some of the things that are a little more tricky. And he started showing me the tricky things first. I don't think he intended to make my life miserable, but I just forgot. And the more I forgot and the more I got frustrated and embarrassed, I couldn't even remember the easy stuff. I mean, my goodness, he could have showed me the oil pan. I would have had no clue. So, because my stress meter was right here, and I wasn't thinking, I kept thinking, oh man, I'm screwing up. I've worked on this so hard and I'm messing up. And that stress made it harder and harder for me to remember, which constantly led to decision errors, skill-based errors, and a variety of other problems. So my point being is that things like stress, things like anger, all these things, frustration, happiness even, you can be so happy and so excited that you can't remember anything. And we've all been there too. You're oh man, this is the best. This is what I've been waiting on the whole time, and I forgot my lines. I don't know if you've ever acted or been in a play. I've done that many times, and it's very interesting that you just forget. You've been practicing these lines forever, and you forget. Well, there's also cognitive states, and it's not. Cognition and this whole idea, is somewhat complex to some people, but all we're really talking about here are things like attention, distraction, overconfidence, complacency. These sorts of things will impact performance. Let's face it. If I'm overconfident, I'm more likely to do what? I'm more likely to violate the rules. You don't find 16-year-old kids that just learn how to drive their car out driving 120 miles an hour. But give them 6 months of experience under their belt, they get a little complacent, overconfident, and the next thing you know, they're taking risks that their skill set can't get them out of. So we look at these things. We look at attention failures, how those might lead to skill-based errors. We've talked about that. We look at things like task fixation. You're so focused on doing one thing, you miss everything else around you. So these are very important concepts, and these are mental states. Now the key about those is they're transient. That you can turn them on and off. You can be angry, and I can turn that on and off. I can be in the middle of a loud discussion with my wife. We're going at it about something. And it's probably stupid, but we're talking and we're getting angrier and angrier. And then my cell phone rings. I pick up the cell phone, and it's my best friend. It's Doug. It's like, dude, what's up? Hey, yeah. Hey, listen, Cindy and I are talking. Can I call you back in about 15 minutes? And the next thing you know, I hang up and you're right back at it. I can turn it on and turn it off. And we all do this. We do this all the time. You don't go around life always unhappy. You don't go around life always angry. Now, it may be that people think you're always angry because that's what they see, and a lot of people think I'm just Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky, but I have bad days too. And the truth is you can turn it on and you can turn it off. These are transient events. So let's compare that to what we're going to call adverse physiological states. Now we're not talking about you mentally. We're not talking about your coping and the way you think. We're talking about issues about you physiologically. Now we can talk about this in aviation. We can talk about things like hypoxia, the lack of oxygen. We can talk about physical fatigue, where in adverse mental states we might talk about mental fatigue and how being tired can affect performance. In physiological states, we can talk about physical fatigue. Let's face it, if you're lifting 50-pound bags of dog food, and you're doing this, and the first 3 or 4 or 5, no big deal. Heck, just throw them out. Maybe the next 5 aren't so tough either, but eventually those 50-pound bags of dog food get heavier and heavier, and your arms get sore and sore, and eventually you get physically fatigued. So that's quite different than mental fatigue that we would see in adverse mental states. We're going to talk a lot about that in this course when we talk about the fatigue lecture and the issue of mental fatigue. But from a physiological point of view, you have a physical fatigue you have to deal with as well. Seriously, standing here talking to you is no big deal. But if I had to stand here for the next 48 hours, I can assure you my legs are going to get tired and I'm going to be physically exhausted. And that's just the way it works. So we have physical fatigue. We also have things like illness. Simply being ill can affect the way you perform. Do you believe that? Let's face it. How many of us have not went to work sick? I certainly have come to work sick. I don't feel well today. I had kind of a rough night with my sinuses and stuff, but I'm here. So we all go to work sick. And in essence, it's interesting because that's what we do. We feel, in the U.S., it's one of those things where we feel compelled to go to work. Even though we may have sick days. It's like, well, why stay home? I don't get any rest there, so I might as well come in and share my illness with everybody, right? People come to work sick. But let's play a game. It's called You Bet Your Life. Yeah. We all have to play the game. And the way the game's played is very simple. I'm going to ask you 3 very easy questions. If you get them all right, I'm going to give you $100. If you get any of them wrong, I'm going to kill you. For real. Yeah. It's a reality game. It's a great reality game. Probably, well, of course not. We're not going to do it for real. But let's pretend we would. So let me do this. Remember, it's called You Bet Your Life. If you get all the questions right, you get $100. If you get any of them wrong, we're going to kill you for real. But to make it a more user-friendly game, I'm going to give you the questions in advance so you can study and you can practice. First question, where were you born? Pretty easy, right? Second question, what was your mother's maiden name? Third and final question, what high school did you graduate from? These are not difficult questions. The trick is you have to answer them right the first time and quickly. It's a simple game. I'm going to ask you 3 easy questions. You get them all right, you get $100. You get any of them wrong, or you're too slow, we're going to kill you for real. Where are you born? Mother's maiden name. High school you graduate from. really simple questions. So now, you can play anytime you want in the next 5 days. So you just tell me when you're ready to play. How many of you would choose to play over any other time? How many would choose to play with the flu? Yeah. How many would choose to play my game over any other time hungover from too much drinking the night before of alcohol? Had a really wild party? Probably not. How many would choose to play my game self-medicating on NyQuil, a really heavy cold medicine? Probably not. Or let's go over to the mental states. How many would choose to play my game with only 3 hours of sleep? No. Well then, how many would choose to play my game at 3 in the morning over any other time? Yeah, you're tired. How many would choose to play my game after just witnessing the birth of your first child? A blessed event. I mean, this is exciting. This is good. How many would choose to play my game after just getting in an argument with your wife? Curious. I've investigated fatal accidents in all those situations. Go figure. You know, sometimes our bodies and our heads aren't in the game. We're not at 100%. I paid for 100%. I expect you to come to the job at 100%. And think about this. Let's even take this one step further. Would it bother you to know that the next time you fly on a commercial airliner, you're flying that commercial jet from Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina, where we live here, to, I don't know, we're going to go to Atlanta, en route to some other place. Would it bother you to know that the people that were in the front of that aircraft were ready to take off in that aircraft, but were unwilling to play my game? Does that bother you? Okay. For those of you that say, no, that just, 90%, that's okay. I'm good with that. Well, wait a minute. I can tell you, as someone who's flown in the Navy, I never once had a crew chief come up to me and say, Doc, you're going to lose an engine. Yeah. I don't know which one. You got 2 of them, so that's good. But you're going to lose one of those 2 engines. No one's ever told me that. You never know when the emergency's coming. And if you're not at 100%, because if you lose an engine, it's not the end of the world. If you do everything right, you shut down the bad engine, and you do everything right, and all the steps correctly, you can land on one engine. It's not the end of the world. Now, is it optimal? No. But you should be able to survive that. But you never know when it's coming. And you have to get those easy questions right the first time, quickly, and be on top of your game. Wouldn't you want them on top of their game if they have an emergency on takeoff? Don't you want those pilots to be at 100%? Is 90% still okay? Or worse yet, let's say you have to go in and, God forbid, you have to have a tumor removed in your brain, or you're having open heart surgery. Would it bother you to know that that heart surgeon was willing to cut on your heart, but was unwilling to play my game? Does that bother you? It should. Would it bother you to know that that neurosurgeon that was going to cut open your coconut and take that tumor out of your brain was willing to do that, but he was unwilling to play my game? So he's willing to bet your life. So I expect the surgeon, the pilot, those people in those critical tasks to be at 100%. And I used to give this lecture and say, well, if you're me, you're a college professor when I was with the FAA. The worst thing that could possibly happen on the job is I get a paper cut. I was working at a computer. There was nobody I could hurt. Until I one day gave this lecture, and I think it was at an Army conference or something, but one of the attendees came up at the break and said, well, Doc, let me ask you a question. How'd you get to work? Well, I drove. Oh, really? So you were willing to drive when you weren't at 100%. You never know, Doc, when you're going to have that flat tire. You never know, Doc, when that car's going to swerve out in front of you. You never know, Doc, when things are going to go bad, and you have to react quickly and right the first time. He had a point. If you're not at the top of your game, why are you even driving to work? And I'm not advocating that everybody that has the sniffles shouldn't go to work, but you have to ask yourself, is this the risk I'm willing to take? Most of us don't even consider the risk. And especially if you're in if you're a surgeon. Let's face it, you really shouldn't be cutting on somebody if you're not feeling well and you're not at 100%, because you're not no matter how hard you try, you can't get there. There's no data showing that, oh, I can just overcome it for for an hour. I can suck it up and do it. No, you can't. You have degraded performance, and we'll see that throughout this course. So we had adverse mental states and adverse physiological states, and those were those transient states that, yeah, you know, the bottom line is, if you're angry, you can get over that. If you're sick, you either get better or you die. Both of them are end games sort of thing. So you're going to get better. They're short term, and you have some level of control over them. On the other hand, when we look at physical mental limitations, we're not talking, it's not quite that simple. I mean, here what we're talking about are things like, you know, the more common things is we all understand, as I often point out, we all understand why not everyone can play in the NFL, National Football League. Not everybody's going to be an NBA, National Basketball Association basketball player, or a world-class soccer player. Not everybody's going to be a concert pianist. Not everybody's going to be able to win American Idol, to be a singer, right? And we all understand, you know, I have no singing talent. I'm not a good-looking guy. I'm not going to be an actor. I'm not Brad Pitt. I don't know if you noticed that, but I'm not. So I probably don't have the aptitude or the talent or the appearance to be a famous movie star. So if we can all accept that, why is it that everybody thinks they can be a pilot? They can be a surgeon. They can be, you know, there's so many occupations that I've sat on two types of selection boards where we're selecting people for an occupation. One was a pilot selection board for military pilots, fighter pilots. The other one was for medical school. And in both those cases, I've had people on the other side of the table who were applying tell me it was their God-given right to fly fighter jets in the U.S. Navy Marine Corps. Really? Well, I'm looking at your grades from the training command when you're flying a T-34 prop aircraft, and you failed 9 tests. Usually, if you fail 2, you're out. How you ended up here, I don't know. I'm surprised you found the room. The truth is you don't have the aptitude to fly jets. Or I'll have a potential medical student come in, and we're doing interviews. And I'm looking at his record. His grades are, you know, he's a C student, which isn't bad. I mean, no offense. I mean, that's great. You can still get through, and you can have a very good occupation. His MCAT, his medical college admissions test scores are low. They're in like the 20th or 30th percentile. And this person wants to be a physician. Now, I would ask you, is this the guy you want cutting on your heart? No, because there's an aptitude for being a physician. There are certain scores on things like chemistry, physics, biochemistry that we expect out of those people. So, there are aptitudes for it. Just because you don't have the aptitude to be a nurse doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just simply means you don't have those skills or that aptitude, the potential to be a nurse. Not everybody can be, any more than everyone can be an auto mechanic. I have no aptitude for being a mechanic. Ask my wife. I'm the guy that when he repairs something, I always have parts left over. I'll have a couple screws, some washers, some nuts. I have things left over. I have coffee cans full of stuff left over. Because my attitude is, hey, if it didn't go back on, it must not have been important. Well, guess what? It was. And a lot of times the things I fix end up breaking worse than when I fixed them. Now, all you have to do is ask my wife. She'll tell you that. I have no mechanical aptitude. I have people change my oil. I know a lot of you change your own oil. It's not rocket science. But you know what? I'd probably screw it up. I don't have the aptitude to be a mechanic. So I would submit to you that when we look at these things, we look at not only physical aptitude, whether it's appearance or your strength, you know, things like that, or height, I mean, we all understand why the person that's 3 feet high probably isn't going to play in the NBA. We all understand why I'm not going to be Brad Pitt, an actor. I mean, we all understand this. Why is it, though, that we don't seem to understand that not everybody can do what they want to do? Sometimes we just simply don't have the aptitude for it. And we also look at things like currency, proficiency show up here, because when I haven't had the training I'm limited mentally. I don't have, my 4-year-old daughter was limited. She had a mental limitation for dressing herself. Not because she's a dummy or that she doesn't have the potential. She just simply at the moment didn't really know how, it was going to take a long time to develop those skills. So during that time, she was limited. My 18-year-old daughter, or actually when she was first learning how to drive, she was limited. I mean, I wouldn't feel comfortable at all with her driving a school bus when she's 16. That's silly. She's limited in what she can do. So when we look at this, so currency, proficiency, you're limited for a period of time, but you can overcome that. It just takes a longer time. I can overcome having bad eyes. I mean, when I got older, my eyesight went away. I have typical presbyopia. As you get older, you have a harder time. You get farsight. You can't see things up close. So you get these cheaters. And I'm starting to lose my hearing. So I'm limited. I can't hear as well as I once did. All right? So these are things that I can overcome with a hearing aid or glasses. But again, these are permanent or longer term disabilities or limitations. Don't really want to use the term disability because, obviously being 6'2" isn't a disability, but it sure is a pain when I'm on a plane and my knees are in the back of the seat in front of me. Okay? So, I just want to make sure you understand the difference. We have adverse mental states and adverse physiological states that are transient events that affect performance, both mentally and physically. And then we have this physical mental limitations that are more long-term, maybe involve aptitudes, physical and mental aptitudes, maybe involve some limitations, some liabilities or disabilities that you've accrued over the years, whether it be eyesight or hearing or something like that, that you can overcome with some devices occasionally and with some training. All right. So we've talked about the condition of the operator, that person at the pointing of the spear. Let's now talk about the next step, which would be, let's go take a look at personal and interpersonal factors. Things that we do to ourselves, okay? And, this is not a good title for this category, but basically what I want to capture are two things. One is basically communication, coordination, and planning. That's our first one we want to look at there. Most of us don't work alone. Most of us interact with other people. And as a result, we have to communicate. All right? This is marriage 101, right? You have to learn to communicate and coordinate. And we do this all the time. You do it without even thinking. We're all the time. If we go out to dinner or we're working with colleagues, we communicate. In class, I communicate with you to give you information so that you can learn. And the first day of class, we hand out a syllabus so I can communicate my expectations and basically have a contract with you on what you can expect out of the class. Kind of where we're going to go, when the exams are going to be. I have to communicate that. If I don't do it well, what happens if I don't tell you when the exams are coming? And I just all of a sudden come in and go, okay, time for the exam. You get angry. It leads to all sorts of mental states. Stress, anger, frustration. It just is a whole cascade. And then you make a lot of errors, decision errors. Because if I don't communicate, it leads to confusion, anger, all this stuff, which leads to bad decisions. So obviously you want to know what's coming. We also have to coordinate. Because I want to make sure, I do this all the time, because I know that I have certain trips that I know I'm going to have to take. So I will look at the syllabus for the semester, and I will coordinate the exam. So if I'm out of town for an exam, that doesn't matter. I have a teaching assistant that can come in and give the exam. And I trust you guys, you're graduate students, so it's no big deal. But the truth of the matter is that I have to coordinate that. I have to coordinate with other of my colleagues that I may have projects I'm working with. I have to coordinate with my wife at home when I'm out of town because we have things we're doing as well. So coordination is a key component. So is planning. You have to plan things. If you're the type of person that just simply takes life as it comes, you're not going to be very successful. You have to be able to plan things to some level. Now you don't have to overplan because that can be just as bad. But the truth of the matter is that we want to plan things out. So communication, coordination, and planning are critical elements in ensuring that decisions are made with the best information and the best knowledge. I mean, we want to make sure we have a successful outcome. So communication, coordination, planning are very important, particularly when we're dealing with teams of individuals. And most of you are going to go out into the workplace and work with teams. So if you have a little bit of background about how people communicate, how they coordinate their activities and plan things, you can be quite successful. So then we have the other category, which we're going to call fitness for duty. I expect people to come to the job ready to perform. I expect you to come to class ready to learn. And I know that sounds a little bizarre when the first day in graduate school we come in and we say, treat graduate school like a job. Treat it like your job, like your life depends on it, like your livelihood, because it does. If you treat graduate school like a job and not like you did when you were an undergrad and you were having a lot of fun and woohoo, I mean, you can still have fun and work. The truth is that what I want you to think about is think about this as like a job. I'm going to be working my job from 8 o'clock till, I don't know, 8. Maybe it's 8 to 8. Maybe it's 12 hours. And I've got some time in there for eating and maybe socializing a little bit or going out and exercising. But it's a job. And when you treat it as a job, that means I have to come to work ready to perform. You wouldn't show up to work hungover. I bet you most of you have never done that or would even consider it. Most of you wouldn't think about coming into work with only 2 hours of sleep the night before. That would be bad. You wouldn't think about coming into work self-medicating. You know, oh, I don't feel well, so I borrowed some medicine from a friend. You would never consider doing that and then going to work in a factory or doing, being whatever you're going to do in engineering. The truth is, when we talk fitness for duty, it's basically I expect the employee to come to the job ready to perform, to be at 100%, or as close to it as they can get. Yeah. But here's the kicker. Let me ask you a question. This is a tough one. If somebody shows up to work hungover, they're not legally drunk, but they're visibly hungover. They smell of alcohol. We've known people that have been there, right? If they physically are unable to perform, but they show up for work anyways, what do you think would happen to them? What do you think would happen to someone that shows up at the Boeing factory hungover? What is going to happen? Or maybe they show up truly, maybe their blood alcohol is just below the legal limits, so they're legal to drive, but they're clearly drunk. What do you think is going to happen? If you're thinking, well, we're going to fire them, you're probably not right. Would you consider somebody that shows up for work, let's say I'm at home for breakfast, I decided this morning I was going to have a Bloody Mary. So that's tomato juice and I think vodka. And I'm going to have a Bloody Mary before work because, man, I had a rough night last night and, I need a Bloody Mary. Is that a violation? Like we talked about in the last segment, we talked about violations, the willful disregard for the rules and regulations, or is that a fitness for duty issue? I mean, they're both bad, don't get me wrong. They're both outside the realm of what we accept, but they're quite different. If I'm drinking at home, if I'm having a Bloody Mary before coming to work, and I show up with alcohol on my breath, and they find out that I had a Bloody Mary, I had a drink for breakfast, I'm probably not going to be fired. I'm probably going to be put in some sort of alcohol rehabilitation program. There will be some sort of intervention program that will work with me because I have a problem. But let's flip that. Let's say I come, because I typically eat my breakfast here on campus, and I'll eat in my office for breakfast. So let's say instead of having that Bloody Mary at home, I now get into my cabinet, I reach behind, I get myself some, I think it's tomato juice and some Worcestershire, whatever they put in there, and a lot of vodka. And I start having a Bloody Mary for breakfast here. What do you think is going to happen? It's quite different, right? Because we don't allow our professors to drink alcohol while they're working. Yeah, I mean, most employers don't. So the point is, I would probably be terminated. Right. Because happening on the job is different than off the job. So when we talk about fitness for duty, we're talking about things that you do off the job on your own time that affect your performance on the job. When I talk about violations, those same things you did off the job, which may have been okay because it was on your own time, you do them in here, you're going to get in trouble. So it's important to understand the distinction because the fixes are very different. The fix for drinking on the job is probably termination. The fix for drinking before you come to work is probably some sort of intervention. All right? So with that, we walk over to the environmental factors. So here we're talking about really two things, the physical environment and the technological environment. In my physical environment, what do I mean? We're going to spend a lot of time in this class talking about things like lighting, noise, vibration, temperature. All these things affect your performance. Absolutely. If the lights are down low and it's dim in the room, you're more prone to perceptual errors. If it's a very loud, noisy environment, you're more prone to perceptual errors. If I make it really noisy and it's harder to think, so you're more prone to decision errors. So it certainly impacts your performance. Likewise, I can turn the lights down. I always have my classes from 8 to 9. I like early morning classes because it gets everybody the first of the morning. They're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to go. And I don't have to deal with that postprandial dip after lunch. Some people like teaching later in the day, but you know what? Now I'm competing with this natural tendency to be tired. And I can put anybody to sleep. All I have to do is turn the lights down low, put the temperature up just a little bit so it's a little warmer in the room, start talking nice and soft. And the next thing you know, you're, especially if I'm doing some sort of math on the board or whatever. The point I'm trying to make is that light, temperature, quiet, noise, all impact performance. A better example, temperature. I give this one all the time. I talk about how if you're driving in sunny San Diego, California, beautiful place to live on the West Coast. If you've ever been there, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's one of the most attractive places to live in the country because the temperature is pretty steady. It's always in the 70s. It's beautiful. Not a lot of rain. And, I mean, it's a wonderful environment. And let's say you're out on a back road and you're driving your car, and all of a sudden you hear the thump, 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 thump. You've got a flat tire. Now, this sucks. I understand that. Nobody likes a flat tire. And you're out of cell phone range, so you can't call to have somebody do it for you. You're going to have to change that tire. All right. This is not rocket. I mean, you can do this. You've seen it. When you were learning how to drive, they showed you how to do it, right? So you go into the trunk, you get the jack out, you find the spot to jack up your car, and then the next thing you know, you got the tires off the ground. Well, actually, before the tire gets off the ground, you start to unloosen the lug nuts, right? Then you take the lug nuts off. When you get it off the ground, you pull the tire that's got the flat, you pull it off of the car, you go into the back of the trunk and you find this little clown tire, this thing that, imitates a tire, and you put it on there and you tighten up the lug nuts. And you do it just right in the patterns they showed you how to do when you were in driver's education, and you double check all those lug nuts because the last thing you want is that little teeny tiny tire to fall off when you're driving to get the other bigger tire repaired, right? So you go ahead and you change your tire. No big deal. You're not happy, but it's safe. Well, let's change it a little bit. Let's now make it, instead of sunny San Diego, let's say you're in Seattle, Washington in October. It's about 35 degrees out, just above freezing, and it's drizzling. And you have that same flat tire. Are you going to take the same amount of time to ensure it's on there safely? Are you going to double check those lug nuts when it's drizzling and cold? Probably not. So you're more likely to make a mistake, a decision error. Or let's change it and say now we're in Phoenix in August, where it's about 105 degrees ambient temperature. It's probably about 140 degrees coming up off that pavement. Are you going to take just as much time to repair that tire? I would suggest you probably won't. You don't want to be out in that heat any more than the next guy. You just want to get it done. What I'm trying to point out here is that temperature also affects performance. We're going to see that. We're going to do a whole module on that later in this course. So certainly the physical environment impacts performance, and we'll look very closely how it does that later. The last category I want to talk about before we close out this module is the technological environment. Here what we're talking about, the typical thing that everybody's used to talking about is the human-machine interface. We could talk about things like usability and the way things are designed. And some things are designed very user-friendly, some things aren't. I mean, you can take your typical remote control. Yeah. I mean, I look at this and it looks pretty self-explanatory until you start trying to figure out which one it controls, because to do this video, I had two of them. I don't know which one goes there and which one goes there, and they're different. They got things different buttons, far, near, I don't know all this stuff. It's not particularly user-friendly. Now, it's not unuser-friendly, but it's just not, the system is not set up to be necessarily user-friendly. We could talk about cell phones. A lot of you might have BlackBerries. Some of you have iPhones. I have an iPhone. I used to have a BlackBerry. The guy that invented the BlackBerry was a moron, a very rich moron, but when he designed it, he didn't make it user-friendly. Because if I have fat fingers, right? Okay. So I would get invariably I'm on the road a lot, and I would get a phone call, and I didn't have a chance to answer it. So I'm now driving home, it's late at night, it's dark, and I notice that I have 3 phone messages. Not a big deal, I can handle that. So I pull out the cell phone, and I start listening to my voicemail. And it's a client, it's somebody that I'm going to be doing some work with. So I want to save that voicemail. What do I have to do? What button do I have to push? Well, to save it, you push the 9 key. If I want to delete it, I push the 7 key. And they are literally a fraction of an inch apart. I'm driving down the road at night, I'm tired, and I want to save. Push 9. But I push 7 and 6 because they're so close together. They're less than a quarter of an inch apart. I've just lost the voicemail. How stupid is that to have a system designed like that? The iPhone was made for idiots like me. The iPhone was made for me. Because in reality, I have 2 very big buttons. If I want to save or delete, and if I delete the voicemail, it still puts it in a folder that I can get back and go, I didn't mean to delete it. I can go get it back real quick. I have to physically go, basically rub the top of my head, stamp a foot, and click my fingers at the same time to get rid of my voicemails. And it's not quite that complex, but I have to go through multiple steps to get rid of voicemails. Because of that very reason, people delete them by accident. They built a user-friendly system. So we can talk, we can go on and on and on. There's books written about this. We have a course, 2 classes I would encourage you to take. One is IE 801 and the other one's IE 802. One's it's basically a graduate usability course. There's a beginner's and an expert kind of thing. And that's taught by Dr. Greenstein. I think you'd enjoy it a lot. Most of our graduate students will take it. And it's a whole course on this idea of usability and human-computer interaction, that kind of stuff. So, I highly recommend it. I think you'd find it very useful. So we spend a whole class on that. Multiple classes. You can get a usability course over in the psych department that a lot of our students take as well. But it's much more than that. Let me give you a story, a true story. When we built our second house in Oklahoma, I tell people, when we built it, my wife is a nature person. She likes to look at the birds and the bees and the squirrels and everything out there. So if you think about your house, your home, whether you have one here or when your parents' house, most of them have a big front door. Usually it's wooden with very little glass in it. At least our front doors, we have some glass around the side. But what my wife really wanted to do is be able to open up that big wood door and have another glass door, which we refer to as a storm door, that you can leave closed so you don't have to worry about bugs and stuff getting in, but you can still see the world. So you open up the big wood door, and here's this glass storm door. Well, when we built the house, we didn't have one installed initially, so my wife and I went down to Lowe's, a hardware store, and home improvement store, and we went out and we picked out a storm door, a glass storm door by, I think it was Larson Storm Doors. Beautiful door, absolutely gorgeous. Very ornate, beautiful glass, tempered glass with etching in it. And we picked this door out together, and we brought it home, and it's a kit. It takes about 3 hours to put it together. Yeah. And so my wife suggested that, I'm reasonably smart. I could probably do it. So I did. I rather than get somebody to do it, I decided I was going to do it. And she knows me pretty well. I got a PhD. I don't need no stinking instructions, right? So I got the hawk watching. She's watching me. Watching out that window to make sure I'm following the instructions. And for the first time in my adult life, I'm actually going step by step. I mean, I've got these instructions out, and I'm going step by step. I mean, and the instructions are about, you think it's a 3-hour process. You know how they have the little check boxes as you get things done, you check them off? I'm checking them off. I'm doing it. I'm an hour and a half into this. The hawk's watching. Everything's right. I'm an hour and a half into this. In the next step, about step 100, it says measure up 3.5 inches from the base of the Z-bar. This Z-bar is a 1-inch wide bar that runs the length of the door jamb. Okay, so you got, where the hinges are, that's your door jamb. And that bar gets screwed into the door jamb, that wood door jamb, and that's what you hang this big storm door. So that's pretty important. It supports the big storm door and ties it into your door jamb, but more importantly, it's ornate. This one was Kelly green, it was dark green, and it had etchings in it. It was beautiful. I mean, it's meant to be pretty, but also useful. So it says measure up 3.5 inches from the base of Z-bar, cut it off with your hacksaw. Not a problem, I can do that. So I measure up 3.5 inches. 3.5 inches. Measure twice, right? Measure twice. Oh, got it. Okay. I cut through the Z-bar all the way through. Blink. Off goes the end. Now, that's not a big deal. I'm thinking I'm right on the mark. Step 101. Okay, step 101. Before cutting the Z-bar, ensure you have this kind of door. Well, guess what? I didn't have the kind of door that I'm supposed to have. So, guess what? I have a 3.5-inch gap at the base of the Z-bar because I didn't need to cut it off. Yeah. It turns out I didn't have the kind of door that required me to cut it off. As a result, now I've got wood exposed at the bottom. My wife's showing everybody that ever visited how her PhD husband screwed up simple instructions. What? It wasn't my fault. Now, it got worse. I will tell you that my parents came over, and my wife explained to my family what I'd done and said, Scott, would you and your dad like to put a storm door on the kitchen that exits out onto the patio? Sure, we can do that. You get those father-son things, right? So we went out and we bought another Larson storm door. It was about the same size as the original one on the front. It's the same style, but it had the same exact manual. We get out there, we're having that beautiful day, and we're out there, we're at that same step. We're having a great day. We hit that same step. My dad says measure up 3.5 inches from the base of the Z-bar and cut it off with your hacksaw. Not a problem, Dad. I can do that. I get halfway through and I'm like, oh, no. Oh. Ah! Because guess what the very next step says? Before cutting the Z-bar, ensure you have this kind of door. And I don't have that kind of door on the back either. My wife would take great pride in showing everybody how I messed up the front door. And then my dad and I messed up the back door. The apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. It got one worse. My in-laws came over about 6 months later. And you'll find out when you have in-laws that one of the things that you do as a son-in-law is you get together with your dad, your father-in-law, and you have projects you do. You keep him occupied. That's what we do. So my wife said, well, do you think you and Jeff could put a storm door on the master bedroom that exits out in the backyard? Sure, we can do that. We went down to Lowe's again, bought another Larson storm door identical to the one out of the kitchen that I'd done with my dad. We come back, and I will admit we had a little liquid gold on board. We were having a few beers. We were not drunk, but we were having a good time. We were sharing stories, and it was fun. I was with my father-in-law, Jeff, and we get along real well, and we're out there talking, and we get to that same exact step. It says measure up 3.5 inches from the base of the Z-bar and cut it off with your hacksaw. I go over there, I measure up 3.5 inches. This time, there's a bright yellow sticker. It says, ensure your measurement. Was that 3.5 inches, Jeff? Yeah, 3.5 inches. I cut through the sticker. I cut through the sticker. My wife never removed the sticker. Yeah. Go figure. I mean, come on. My wife took great pride in showing everybody how I messed up the front door alone. I messed up the back door out of the kitchen with my parents, with my dad. And I mixed up the master bedroom because now we got another chunk out with a sticker on it saying, ensure your measurement, with my father-in-law. Now I tried to explain to her, I said, honey, this is technological environment. These people messed up. You should never write instructions with the next step saying don't do what the first step said. This is technological environment. She says, no, it's not. It's physical mental limitations. You're an idiot. She might have been right. But the point here is you're going to find that there are instructions. There are checklists written. They're just written poorly. And people follow them. They adhere to them. They go step by step like I did, and then they mess it up. Whose fault is it? Do you think Larson knew that they had a problem with their checklist, with their procedure? Yes, they did. Why else would they put the sticker there? You can't fit. Why didn't they just replace the manuals? Well, it probably cost more. They probably had multiple manuals printed up. And the truth is that, at the end of the day, it might have been cheaper to fix it with a sticker. You're going to see when you get out in the real world that people, rather than replace the checklist or the procedure, they'll just put it on the internet. We'll send an email. We'll put the equivalent of a sticker out there and hope that everybody gets it right. Well, more importantly, I would go one step further. I'd say, ask yourself this. Who do we go out there and test these products on to make sure that no one will have a problem? If somebody is building a fighter aircraft, and they go out and they hire test pilots, are test pilots good pilots or bad pilots? If you look at it on a scale from here's the best pilots here, and here are the worst pilots there, where would you put the test pilot? Are they closer to the good pilot, or are they closer to the bad pilot on that continuum? I would submit to you that test pilots are closer to the good pilots. They might even be excellent pilots. So if that's true, then let me ask you this. Can a test pilot, can an excellent pilot, can a good pilot pretend to be a bad pilot? Can they behave like a bad pilot? No. No, they don't know. Can a bad pilot pretend to be a good pilot? No. Who is your more likely person to screw things up? Is it the best pilot or the worst pilot? It's the worst pilot, right? So why aren't we going out and finding test pilots that look like the people that are going to have the problems? Why do we get test pilots that look like people that will never really have a problem? Think about it this way. Car design. If you're going to design a minivan, who are you going to go out to get to test drive it and help you design it? Are you going to just design it you're going to have some computer graphics geek in some room in Michigan, up there at Ford, sitting there going and designing it? Well, maybe initially, but when you test it to see how you want things laid out and how it feels and how it looks, who do you get to test drive that? Are you going to go get 17-year-old males to do that? No. Are you going to get people like me to do it? No. I'm not going to drive a minivan. I have no interest. Who do you get? You go get soccer moms. You go get moms. Because moms drive minivans. And if you look at the way people design minivans, they design it for mothers. So they have certain cup holders in certain spots. They have certain things that, as a mom, you would really like. Integrated child seats, stuff like that. Because that's what moms want. If you're going to build a Corvette, who do you design that for? Do you design it for the 16-year-old boy? No, they can't afford a Corvette. You go find fat, bald men like me and design it for them. Make sure they fit in it. Make sure it's designed for, because they're the guys that can afford them, and they're the guys that have to have them so they can look younger all of a sudden. The point here is that you design for the people that are going to use it. And you make sure that your design matches their aptitude. So, it's not surprising that when you give me a manual on how to put a storm door together, if you didn't design it for the person that isn't particularly mechanically inclined, may have a physical mental limitation, as my wife pointed out, you're going to have a problem. And they did. You're going to see, if you go to work for international companies, you're going to see a lot of instructions and checklists are translated into other languages. And when we translate into other languages, we lose meaning, we lose order, and a whole host of things. We're going to talk about that when we talk about information processing, about how the order of things matters. The order of the way things come in a checklist matters. With that, we've talked about all the preconditions for unsafe acts. We spoke about the condition of the operator. We talked about adverse mental states, physiological states, and physical mental limitations. Then we transitioned talking about communication, coordination, and planning, fitness for duty. We followed up and we wrapped up with physical environment and technological environment to kind of give you a sense. And we're going to cover all of those things in greater detail within this class, within IE800. With that, we'll come back. The next module, we're going to combine the supervisory and organizational tier, and I think you'll find those useful as well. Thank you.